Hi, my name is Stephanie, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that is committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles as introduced by Sydney Banks to people throughout the world. And now I've just clicked past my thing, so I'm going to wing this. Judy said, I was like, oh, it's gone. Okay, that's fine.
That's okay.
Judith Sedgeman is our special guest today, and she has been at this for a very long time. She had the blessing to spend time with Sydney Banks in person and is very privileged to share this with all of us. And she'll be talking about walking the talk today. So it's over to you, Judy.
All righty. Well, thank you very much. And hi, everybody. I see, oh my goodness, I haven't had a chance to look at all the pages, but I see a lot of faces that are familiar and a lot of people that I'm not sure I've ever met personally, but that I've been on other online deals with, and then some people I've not met. So I'm glad to see all of you here. And I also, before I get started, because sometimes, you get lost and you don't pay attention to hands raised and things. If you want to ask questions, if you want to stop me and say, wait, I didn't get that. I want you to say it another way, or I have a question. Don't feel shy about it because number one, I don't mind it. I've been teaching in actual teaching settings like, universities, high schools, junior high school, and been in and out of my whole life. And I'm used to people with raising their hand and asking me questions. And I think if you have a question on your mind, you should get the answer to it so you can clear your head and listen again. And so it'd be my privilege to call on you, whether I'm in the middle or at the end or early on. So please don't hesitate to ask. And if you have a question, chances are there's other people that were hoping somebody would ask that question. Never fails. And also, I just wondered, I was going to ask for just a show of hands real quick, and I'll just check the screen real quick. How many people have read any of Sid's books? Oh, that's a lot of people. That's great. Okay, that's good. That's kind of like one of my missions in life now is to try to remind people that Sid is a primary source. And it's like, you wouldn't try to study, the works of an author or a novelist or, a philosopher and never read his original writings. But somehow there's been so many books written, and I've written one of them, so I'm not blaming anybody for this because a lot of us have written books. But there's nothing like going to the original author, the source material first, and then read the books and read as many as you want and reach your own conclusions. But I think it's sometimes I think people think, oh, well, those books are old now, and that was a long time ago, and he's been dead since 2009. I'm going to read more current stuff. But he writes. Well, the two things that I think that people can see very clearly from reading Sid's books, because um, there are six of them, and only one is nonfiction, the missing link. The rest are fiction, and they're silly. They're stories. They're very, he wasn't like a great fiction writer or anything. He just tried to use the voices of different people and the way they went about their life to tell other people what this was all about. And so the books it's not like you're going to read, a work of fiction that's going to leave you crying and, we're waiting for the movie, but it's like it's very real and it's in easy to everybody can recognize the language. He writes very simply, and people talk like real people talk to each other. And I learned a lot about sharing the principles early on, since there were so few of us doing the work and we were scattered all over the place and we didn't have too much to rely on. I learned a lot from just reading the book, the book that was available at that time, which was the first one he wrote, Second Chance. And I thought, wow, I mean, you listen to the characters or you read and hear it in your mind and you think, Yeah, it's deep stuff. It's really easy to see what they're pointing at, but I never thought of that before. It's kind of it's revealing. So anyway, if anybody asks you, how should I start? I'd say start with Second Chance and read the books, read some of them if they appeal to you. So, um, today I was going to talk about walking the talk, and the reason that I picked that title is because, that's kind of like no matter what profession you're in or, what you're doing in life, if you represent an organization or a point of view, you'll be told you should walk the talk, you got to be authentic. And I think one of the things that I notice often is that people think that there's that if they really, 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 really are to be credible as someone who has seen the principles in action, they should never have a bad day. And, that's kind of like, it's like if you get to be a cheerleader for a football team, you're not supposed to cry while you're cheering, it's kind of like, and the fact is that authenticity is our stock in trade, just, I remember the first time I was going to speak, it happened to be that Sid was in Florida where I was, and I'd learned and been exposed to this because I ran a medical practice management business, and Bill Client, who is a doctor running a private practice in Bradenton, was one of my clients, and he introduced me to this work and to Sid, and so anyway, I got very connected with just I was very fascinated by it because it was so different from anything I'd ever learned in college. And as a matter of fact, I was really interested in psychology in college, but it was so depressing, I just couldn't major in it because it was all about what's wrong with people. And I kind of wanted to know what was right with people, like how do you work with that? And and so I asked Sid, I said, Sid, I do a lot of public speaking, and I was invited to speak at a luncheon, at a business luncheon, and I'm so excited about what I'm learning here. It's all new to me, but I'm really excited about it. But when do you know that you're ready to talk about it? And Sid said, well, what's changed for you? He said, what's the one thing that you could answer that question without even stopping to think? What would you say? And I said, well, the one thing that I would say is that most of the transactions that go on in the business world are done without regard to the state of mind of the group or the individuals who are speaking with each other. And I realized that life looks very different uh, to people in different states of mind, and that it was important to treat the state of mind before you talk about the problem. And he said, now, do you think that would make a big difference in the business world if people knew that? And I was kind of dumbfounded because it had certainly made a big difference for me, and I was running a business. So yeah, I'm like all the other people running a business. I was like, yeah, it made a big difference for me because if somebody's in a really low state of mind, I don't bring up stuff. I try to, kind of just make casual conversation or change the tone before I get down to business, and then it goes better. And he said, well, I think that'd be a good topic, don't you? And I thought, yeah. It's kind of like, it was sort of obvious, but it was so obvious. And I think this is what I'm pointing to. When you want to share with other people, that's what walking the talk is to share the authenticity of change that you experienced. Doesn't matter what it is, because if it comes from you and you're talking about something that's real to you, people feel that. And that's and we can't we're not teaching people words. We're not teaching them, yeah, we have three principles and we have definitions and we have, a lot of words written, but we're not teaching them the words. We're teaching them the truth. We're teaching them the experience of really seeing that I created that in my mind, and it looks real to me and I don't like it. So I can change it. I'm not stuck with it because I'm the person that's making it up. And and as soon as people really see that, really experience it kind of profoundly, it's not like you experience it as, oh, well, maybe that's true. That's an interesting thought. As soon as you really get to this moment where you think, I I just created a negative experience in my family because I didn't stop and ask myself, am I in a good state of mind to be talking about this right now? That's the only, it's like keep your mouth shut if you can't say it from a good feeling, or take the risk and say it anyway and deal with the consequences. But that is the simple truth about life that would change the world if people cared more about the connection, the feeling state in which people are interacting than they care about the argument or the content or the differences or the similarities in what people think. So I don't know that, this isn't, except for that one conversation, this isn't something that we talk about much or that anybody ever really shares, but the difference between getting involved in the principles and all the other things we learn to do as a profession is it's not a behavior, it's a deep awareness of what's going on with people inside. It's a deep awareness of why is that person scowling? Why is that person avoiding me? Why doesn't that person answer my question? And why can't I find the words to say what I really want to say right now? And always you just need to settle down, quiet down, wait for wisdom, wait for an insight. Yeah, there's one thing that goes wrong for people, which is a misunderstanding of the role of thought in life, and one cure, which is to deepen the understanding that you have of the role of thought in life, yours and others, and then watch it play out and be connected to people enough to know, to feel where they are. To say, it's not a good time right now for me to be talking to this child about this. It's not a good time for me to make this phone call because I'm pretty upset. And, you can say that and it sounds kind of goofy. It's like, yeah, well, that's what your mother tried to teach you from the time you were little, but that's not how life works. Well, it would be how life works if people saw the profound significance of caring about the level of consciousness that people are operating from. The reason it isn't the way the world works is because the world is always focused on the details instead of on the feeling, on a connection with people, on creating a connection before you engage in any kind of discussion. So when I first got involved in this work, I was running a business. It was a medical practice management business, and I had 44 people working for me, and we had all of our clients who are doctors in either private practice or group practice, not working for hospitals. And I actually, the 2 days before I met Bill Pettit, which was accidental. I just had a former client who had retired, who was a doctor, who said, there's somebody new in town that I think you should meet because I can see that he really needs help with the business part of his practice. But I also think that you would really be fascinated by what he does. And, we were driving along and I said, well, what does he do? The guy said, he's a psychiatrist. And I said, stop the car. I said, I already have 3 psychiatrists. They're impossible. I don't want any more psychiatrists in my business. He said, no, he's not like the other ones. You'll be surprised. And I'd known this guy for years, and I said, okay, fine. Yeah, fine. I'll meet him. I'll do that. I'm not going to embarrass you, but it's probably not going to work out. That was kind of silly. but that's, that's how ignorant I was. Um, but as I noticed, the first thing I noticed, I guess, in his office, although it was not particularly well organized and the files weren't set up in a way that they could maintain privacy because people could read the names from the sign-in desk on the files and things like that. There were a lot of little details that we could fix right away. And then it was clear too that he really had no, he had no way to really supervise his staff because he really didn't understand what they were supposed to do. It had never dawned on him to wonder, like, what do you do if they turn you down? If the insurance company, can you rebill it? What do you do? They're just simple things. And so, I knew that I could help that practice. But also I was shocked by the fact that of all the cold calls I had made in the course of building my business, um, meeting doctors and trying to explain what we would do and how the fees worked and what we could offer and what we didn't do. And uh, they were generally suspicious and a little hostile in the beginning. And it just kind of goes with, I guess, the territory of, when you're going to turn over all your business records and everybody to total strangers, you get a little defensive about what you want to share. But, the first thing that Bill said to me is, well, you come highly recommended. I heard people talking about, the doctor's lounge and saying your company's done wonderful things for their practice and they recommend you. And he said, and I don't even know what to ask you because if I knew what you did, I wouldn't be talking to you. So if I knew how to do that. And so he said, so the question is, can you see things, from ask me anything. And if you see things that you think you could help me with, then, let's talk. And he had such a great attitude. He was like, I'm going to trust you until you show me that I can't, rather than I don't trust anybody until they prove to me that I should. It's a very different way of looking at life. And so anyway, that was how I started. And the only thing that he told me is that I don't really want you hiring people for the office unless I've interviewed them, because it's more important to me that how people interact with the people that come into my office than it is how skilled they are at what they're going to do. And so I'm going to count on you to pick people that are skilled enough at what they need to do in the office, and then let me pick from the standpoint of the person's how they're going to interact with other people. Now, interestingly enough, you would think that a lot of people would care about that, but he's the first doctor that ever asked me that. He's kind of like, just, staff the office, get it going, just do whatever you have to do. And they just kind of wash their hands of it. But it really mattered to Bill, the way people were greeted, the way they felt when they came in the door, the comfort in the waiting room, the care people paid to not leaving a 10-month-old magazine out on the table that everybody already had to look at 15 times. And it mattered. The interaction, human interactions really mattered. And that mattered to me too. I started to matter more and more to me as I started to understand what he was talking about. And I thought, wow, having a standard for human interaction, for the state of mind, for being able for people to know and be able to know when it's not a good time to talk, when they need to, how simple it is to clear your head, how easily you can calm down and take a fresh look. If people knew that, the business world would be a totally different place, never mind politics and all this other stuff. And and so I kind of took it on as my mission to take it into business, other people that ran small businesses and in the Chamber of Commerce and things like that. And I was amazed at how people would come back and say, I came to that talk that you gave at the chamber luncheon, and it was really interesting. And it was really about, more or less about my business, how I operated my business, and the kind of thinking that I encouraged, and the way in which I allowed people to calm down or take quiet time and settle down before I talked to them if they were upset, and the way I interacted with my clients or my customers or whatever. But he said, the thing that really changed the most was, how I was dealing with my teenage daughter. Or, this whole thing, something happened while I was coming to your sessions on business practices. Suddenly I was driving home one day and I thought, gee, I'm not very considerate of my wife. I had this insight that, and I just assumed that she's going to be home with dinner ready, and that didn't matter. She couldn't possibly have a bad day. What did she have to do all day? As compared to what I was doing. And he said, I just had this sudden feeling that, oh my gosh, I'm lucky that I'm still married, because I'm not very considerate. And, he would say, so I had a talk with my wife, and you just wouldn't believe what a difference this has made. And I gave her this little book, Second Chance, to read, and now we read it together. And I was like, this is quite an amazing, small, tiny thing that is transformative. It truly is transformative. But in order for it to be a transformative experience for yourself and the people in your life, it starts with you transforming, not just knowing the language and knowing the books to recommend and having the outline of what you talk about in these things. It starts with you suddenly being very different in the way you look at life and the way you wake up in the morning and see things and see possibilities. And it's beautiful because I think everybody would rather be happy and rather not be anxious, and rather not be frightened, or rather not be insecure. So the benefit is all ours. Walking the talk means you get to have a really lovely life. And there's no pressure on you to do anything for anybody, because everybody has it in them to enjoy that life. And the better they see it around them and the people that they trust, the more they look there, and when they look, they see it for themselves. So that's kind of walking the talk, is like having a happy life. There's no downside, it's like, this is not a high pressure employment situation. It's certainly not a high risk. You can't really hurt anybody by telling them the truth and telling them what you really think or what you're thinking about. And if they don't want to hear it, or they can't hear it, that's okay. They might. And if any of you have ever taught school, like real school, like middle school, it's amazing, if you live long enough, the number of people you'll see them 10 years later after they graduated from college or whatever, and they'll come and say, you remember me? I was in your sixth grade class, or I was in your fourth grade class. And you go, yeah, 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 yeah. And they'll say, well, do you remember the day you said blah, 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 blah? And they'll say something. And you go like, uh, if you say I said it, okay, I probably said it. And they'd say, change my life. And you go like, holy cow. I mean, it was just some random thing I said in class, but it wasn't what I said. It was what they heard. And that's how this works. It's not what Sid said to any of us, it's what we felt and heard as he was saying it for ourselves. And that's our job in life, is to stay connected to the promise of a peace feeling state, to the benefit and promise to yourself and to those people around you who will see that, and they'll go like, I want that. And they start to find it in themselves. So we're not really teaching, we're pointing in the direction of shared well-being and mental well-being that everybody has. And the logic of the principles, the first time you hear it, you go, yeah, that's, I never thought of it that way, but that's pretty obvious. I've never heard anybody say, oh, I don't think that we actually think, and then we see what we think like it was real. I've never had anybody say that. It just seems self-evident to people. Yeah, I just didn't realize I was making it up. I thought I was looking at the world and thinking real things about what was really happening. I didn't realize that there was a middleman involved in that. That's the key. But once, I mean, you can't just keep saying that over and over again. You know, what you have, it's the engagement in how life works, how seeing that deeper and deeper in yourself and others alters the connection that you have to other people and to life itself. And that's how we walk the talk. It's not how well it's not being the most articulate or having the best metaphors or the best jokes or anything like that. It's people being in your presence and going like, man, there's something here that really touches me. I don't know what it is. Well, it's your well-being waking up. I lived for a while in La Conner when I first learned this. I spent 10 years out with George and Linda Pransky in La Conner. And I was working with them. I wasn't spending 10 years, sitting around listening to them talk all the time. But there was another woman that was working there that some of you at some point in life may have met named Leslie Miller. And Leslie Miller was just a delightful person. And she had these two adorable children. And something happened. Her family lived in California and she had to go. Someone was sick or someone, she had some reason she had to go for a few days. And so she asked me if I would watch her little boy. She kind of split the kids up and asked somebody to watch the little girl and somebody to watch the little boy. So he was staying at my house and he was so cute. And he is an adult now, he would hate to hear this story, but anyway, he was really cute. And the first morning I had to wake him up. He was going off to preschool, I think. And so I went in the bedroom where he was sleeping and I opened the blinds and the light came in and kind of woke him up. And he sat up in bed and he looked around and he saw the light coming in the window and he said, "Yay, I get another day." Isn't that just the cutest story? I love that. I mean, I just could have listened to that every morning for the rest of my life. And he was so sincere and so excited to just get up and start his day. And I told Leslie, she said, yeah, he says that all the time. He just really loves life. Well, that's kind of like how when Sid used to talk about how we could find in the childlike experience of life, rediscover what it was like before we started thinking a lot about it. And that's a perfect example. As children, people, they don't have a lot of negative thoughts. Negative thoughts are things that we make up as we get older and then store away and reconsider frequently. But you very rarely, I mean, babies cry when they have a diaper problem and you fix it and they stop crying. Or when they're hungry and you feed them and they stop crying. I mean, they cry for human needs that they can't meet for themselves. But adults, cry for help for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with anything physical or their life comfort. It has to do with their thinking about life. But when you wake up to that, then you get to be completely self-sufficient again, because we can, it's not like you don't ever call a friend or want to talk to somebody or, we all have that kind of situation or a loved one, but you don't need to do that. We have the ability to know that our default setting is peace of mind, a quiet mind, and a positive feeling state. And that if we return to default, we can get a fresh start. And you're only one thought away from that. It's not like you have to spend a lot of time brooding to get to a different state of mind. You have to just shut down, kind of like shutting off the computer and turning it back on. I thought about this because the other day here where I live, we had a lightning storm and everybody's television went out. And, so I didn't know what to do. I turned it on and off a few times and it didn't make any difference. And And I thought, well, I don't need to really think about it until it's time to watch the news tonight anyway, so I wasn't going to think about it. But then at lunch, I thought, well, I should really just unplug the whole thing and then plug it back in, see what happens. And so I did. I just moved a piece of furniture and unplugged the TV and unplugged the TV from the wherever the cable reception is, and replugged everything in, turned it on, worked fine. And that's the same thing as kind of shutting down the thinking that you're doing, just turning it all off, clearing your head, going to quiet, going dark for if you were like a TV, if you think of your mind as like a TV, just going dark for a couple seconds and then slowly plugging it back in and seeing what comes to mind. And you'll get all new thoughts, a whole new picture. Because we're built to be happy and at peace. That's the design. Now, but we have the free will to fool around with it. And that's Sid used to call it the cosmic joke. Is, but he said, what would life be like if all we could ever experience was peace of mind and complete ease and grace in life? You would never appreciate it because you wouldn't know the other way. And that's really true, isn't it? It's like it's very difficult to appreciate getting warm if you've never been cold. you know? And so for a lot of people, it's never dawned on them that feeling down or feeling insecure is not a flaw. It's not a defect. It's not a mental weakness. It's your mind's way of getting your attention. It's your mind's way of saying, hello, hello, hey, you need to kind of shut it off for a little bit. It's all getting kind of messed up there. And as soon as you take charge and do that, then your system is set to reset, to reboot. We've all had this experience of, this is again another silly example, but it's very evocative to me. As everybody's had the example of being in the middle of something at home, you're disciplining a child or you're in a discussion with your spouse or your brother or your sister, and it's kind of getting heated, and then the phone rings. Now, if you decide to answer the phone and you're in the middle of this thing saying, I've told you 1,000 times, I'm real, and the phone rings and you go over and you don't pick up the phone and say, oh, you pick up the phone and say, hello, because you know that you changed your thought. You've changed the direction of your thinking. Now, we do that all day long, every day. It's like I had an Uber driver the other day that was taking me somewhere, and he was having this very pleasant conversation. He was telling me about he'd gotten a dog, and he asked me if I liked animals, and I said yes. And he said, "Oh, let me tell you about my dog." He was very excited about his dog. So he's telling me these cute things about the dog and how there's somebody with the dog, and how he picked his dog and all of this, and then somebody cut him off. They were like trying to pull in the lane, and he had to slow down and then blew the horn, and then the person looked over and he says, "You son of a bitch." And then he came back and he said, and the dog, then he did the cutest thing. It's like he had that moment, he got that off his mind, and then he came back to the dog and he was like, it never happened. But that's life, isn't it? We've all done that. We've all done that. We've all, interrupted one train of thought to go over here and tend to that appropriately, and whatever we think is appropriate, and then go right back to where we were, because we're in charge of where we direct our thinking. We just forget that we're doing it. But that is the most powerful gift that we have as human beings, is that we don't have to entertain any particular thought. And that's the thing that Chris Heath and I do a podcast called Psychology Has It Backwards, which a lot of people were very offended by the title, but we said we're old and we'll offend you if we feel like it. It's kind of like we felt that it was a true statement. And and so it's actually gotten very it's got a pretty huge following around the world now. And so we thought we were going to make about 20 and that'd be it, but now we're on number 177. And we just keep thinking of things to talk about, so we keep doing it. And then people keep sharing it, so we're going to keep doing it. But in doing it, we didn't mean anything insulting. I mean, a lot of uh, theories in life have been wrong and proven by evidence and new discoveries that they were wrong. It's not like that's the whole evolution of science. Nobody thinks the Earth is, well, somebody might, but very few people think the Earth is flat anymore. But for a long time, everybody thought the Earth was flat. So well, everybody thinks that life creates your psychological difficulties. Now, we live in an era when, with much less now with the principles spreading so fast, but there are a lot of people who honestly believe that if you've had a really terrible childhood, which many people have had, if you've had a lot of disappointments, if you've lost people that were very close to you too soon or under terrible circumstances, that you'll just never, come to peace with it. It's always going to affect you. And, that's a belief that's reinforced generally by almost everybody that you talk to, either in casual conversation or professionally. Well, this happened when I was 12, and then I was very upset, and nobody would listen to me, and I didn't have any friends, blah blah blah. And then it was like, oh, no wonder, you poor thing. Well, you know, the principles teach us that that's not a really good idea to take that thought on. That's a thought too. But if you live in a world in which the prevailing thought that most people will come back with when you tell them something is, oh boy, that's tough, man. If you've gone through that, it's going to be tough. It's going to be years probably before you can get over that. That's really sad. Then you've been reinforced. Your negative thinking has been reinforced by other people. And then you think, well, that must be the case because so many people think it. And, our goal in life is to question that thinking. It's like a lot of people thought the earth was flat, but when somebody discovered that it wasn't, took a while, but they changed their minds. And so, I think probably some of you have encountered people in this work that have said, don't mix it, for example, like never mix it. That's a no-no. And the reason that we say that, we know that all of us, do the best we can, and sometimes you have a lot of training in one direction or another. What you're looking to do is to find the simplest, deepest understanding you can so that mixing it doesn't make sense to you. Not so that you start feeling guilty when you say something like, well, a behavioral therapist would have said blah, blah, blah. It's no big deal. But the reason why we talk about things like that this is deeper, explains all why there are so many theories. There are 200, the last time I looked, there were 245 psychological approaches listed. Well, if it takes 245 different specialties and still there are many people who take medicine and go to see people and never get well, so to speak, then we haven't found it yet, have we? Because it's like when they find the cure for a disease and they come up with a vaccine for that disease, the disease is no longer a problem. They have the answer. And so as arrogant as this sounded, especially when there were 15 of us who thought it, as arrogant as this sounds, there's no, what we're explaining to people about the role of thought explains why people are so attached to the theoretical models that they were taught. Why it's hard for them to listen to a whole new way of looking at people and looking at how the mind works, because you don't get a lot of positive reinforcement about that. Like I was on the faculty of medical school where I live now in West Virginia University for 15 years, and I taught the principles as a prevention strategy. Now, at some point during the course of those 15 years, Bill Pettit moved to West Virginia, we recruited him and he became a part of behavioral medicine as a doctor, as a psychiatrist. And he practiced this approach as a cure. So it was both prevention and cure. Because if people saw it early in life before they started taking their negative thinking seriously and getting upset by other people's thinking and moods and all of that, it would prevent their distress and prevent them from lashing out and prevent them from getting upset or being bothered by what's going on around them. It helped them to keep their bearings in life. But if they have never heard of it and they've lived their life in a way in which they've taken a lot of thinking seriously or taken other people's thinking seriously and, gotten caught up in a lot of negative ideas about themselves or their backgrounds or their hopelessness, it's also a cure. Because as soon as they see that that's artificial, it's just a vision, it's just something they made up uh, with legitimate information that they had. But they don't have to believe it now, and it's not true in the moment. If it's not happening now, it's over. You know, the only place that all of these negative things that have happened to people in the past can happen again is in your memory, which means it's like watching a bad, well, it's like my 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 grandson when he was little used to like horror movies. I don't know why kids like horror movies, but as a grandma, I didn't like them. And so I could, I could, and when he was at my house, I could turn them off and prevent him from watching them. But when he was at his house, upstairs in his room, I couldn't prevent him from doing that because he had the access to them. And they didn't scare him at all. Now, what's the difference? Why it was horrifying to me and my heart would be pounding and I'd be go, oh God, I can't look at this, is because I had context. I had other thinking about, and I knew that some of the things that happened in those movies that were all just a story to him had happened in the world. That those bad things had happened and that you read about them in the newspaper and that you've treated people maybe that have, been, psychologically upset about what happened. And so we have a whole different context of looking at it. And I noticed the interesting thing is, as he grew up, he kind of stopped liking them too. And it's because he had started to have contact with things that actually go on in life and go like, you can't really enjoy watching people. That's not fiction. That's like making up a story about something that you read in the newspaper. Yeah. So we take we have a different attitude towards our own ideas as life evolves and as our own understanding of life evolves. Like I remember when I was growing up, I had imaginary friends, only my friends were alligators. We lived in Florida, we lived on a bayou, and there were alligators in the bayou. And the alligators were, I was taught early on to not go in the bayou, even wade around in the shallow part because there were alligators there and they would eat children. So, so my imaginary friends were nice alligators. And just to sort of erase the alligators in the bayou thing from my mind, I just made up imaginary nice alligators that would never do a thing like that and were helpful and would help you get up on the boat if you needed a push and, would catch the line for you and bring it up to shore and help you to tie up afterwards and would get up on the grass and play with the dogs and the cats and all these things that no self-respecting alligator would ever do. But it helped me at that time in my world to have these imaginary alligator friends that were nicer. And we do that. That's the beauty of the human imagination is that we create the thinking that we want, or we create the thinking that we is unresolved in our minds that we think if we keep thinking about it, we can fix it. But the only time we ever get an insight is when we're not trying. No one's ever thought their way into an insight because when you're thinking actively. You're not thinking with a free and clear mind. You're thinking you're going through the library, looking at all the titles in the books, going, one of these things has got to have the answer in it. But the book you're looking for hasn't been written yet, and it's not in there. So if you're looking for solutions, if you're looking for new ideas, if you're looking for creativity, if you're looking to imagine yourself in a different situation and to kind of play around with how that might be for you, you got to start from zero. You got to start with a clean slate. And starting with a clean slate is just not thinking about it actively, not, just turning your attention. It's like when you daydream, sometimes you just catch yourself looking out the window at the sky and not thinking anything in particular. And suddenly stuff comes up, like all these wonderful ideas occur to you. And I know people who like write poetry that way. They just sit around in nature and then suddenly they get an idea and they start writing it down. And a lot of people who write beautiful poetry say, I didn't have a clue what I was going to write about till I started writing. And the truth is that that's a really good way to live your life. Now, does the person plan to write a poem? Yes. Are they going to have a pen and pencil handy? Yes. Are they thinking I might write a poem today? Yes. But that's it. They're open to it. They're not pushing themselves. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But they're in the state of mind where if there was a poem hanging around in there, it could had someplace to pop into. you know. And that's kind of how you have to really see creative thinking, is that you always have access to wisdom and insights and fresh thoughts and new ideas, but you don't know what they are, and you're always surprised. Usually, most people, when they get a really great idea, it's like inventors, they want to solve a problem, but they have no idea what's going to solve it. And then, they're just sitting around one day, or they're out playing with their kids, or they're taking a walk, and all of a sudden something comes to mind and they start to see it. So they, sit down and they really look to see what's happening in there, and they get an idea for an invention. Now, there was a moment in time when they didn't know what they hoped that they would be able to answer that question, but they didn't know if they would. Then there was a moment in time where they were thinking, maybe I can, maybe I'm starting to have some thoughts that look like they might be helpful. And then there's like the moment after that when they go, oh, I see what to do. Well, that's really how we live our life. When you say walking the talk, I mean, that's how Sid lived his life. Sid was a very in the moment person. And he was also fascinated when he would revisit his past by how different what he would see as an adult Sydney Banks, who had, had this insight into the principles, saw his childhood than he did as he was living it. And it's funny, I was in Scotland about 10 or 12 years ago, I guess, and I was doing some work there, and somebody who took me to the neighborhood where Sid was, where he grew up, and it really was still a very impoverished neighborhood. It was not a delightful, warm, welcoming place, and it was kind of run down and dirty and crowded, and the buildings are in bad shape and so on. And I remembered that Sid used to say that as a grown man, he remembered that they used to play in a castle up the hill from where they lived. So I said to my friend, is there a castle around here somewhere? She said, oh yeah, let me take you up that hill. It's up at the top of that hill. And so we went up there, and it was kind of a ramshackle castle, but it definitely had been a castle. It was the Lord of the Manor's home of some sort, and had a big courtyard, and it was beautiful space compared to the neighborhood, because it was, number one, it was clean air and up high and beautiful view over the neighborhood and the water, and there was a great big area, grassy area that they could play in, and it was safe. And I said, I told my friend this, Sid used to talk about playing in this castle. She said, really? She said, well, that's interesting because the last time I heard him talk about it, he talked about how terrible his childhood was. And I said, yeah, I know, but he's mentioned a couple of times that they never appreciated that they actually were playing in somebody's castle. And she said that's really funny. The kids still do that. She said, sometimes when school's out, you'll see kids up here playing in the castle area. And I mentioned it. I think it was, I'm not sure who it was. Sid had already died when this occurred, but I mentioned it to somebody from Salt Spring, and they said, yeah, Sid went back to the castle and he was shocked to think that he didn't appreciate what he had had access to as a child as a playground. He just had no idea. And he humbly told his close friends, wow, he said, boy, I was sure lost in negativity. How many kids get to play on the castle grounds? And that's, he's looking at the same piece of property in the same neighborhood in the same situation, but he's seeing it through different eyes because when your thinking and your level of consciousness change, everything that you look at looks different. And that's why we live in separate realities, even though we're sharing the same stuff. Because we're seeing it through our own state of mind and our own experience and our own thoughts. And that's why it's so pointless to argue with somebody who's very convinced that they're right at the moment. I used to be, and when I was in high school, I was in debate club. I liked debate. And and I and I remember remember having the thought at one point, there were two people in our debate group that were just so good at it. I mean, they were just like light years beyond most of us in terms of preparation. They hardly prepared. They weren't interested. They were just in the moment listening to the other person talk and answering, and we would prepare. We would think, well, the person's probably going to bring up these points, so I'll have these points. And then if they brought up other stuff entirely, we were completely freaked out. And but these guys were never freaked out because they didn't care what other people brought up. They were just listening and waiting to see what they should say back. And I didn't recognize at the time, I had no idea, nobody had ever heard of the principles. And but I remembered it afterwards, and I remembered thinking, yeah, that's the natural gift that we have, is that if we really are alive in the moment, listening to life, paying attention to what's going on around us, we see what we need to see when we need to see it. We're built that way. And that's the natural law. That's what the principles teach us. So I've talked an awful lot and I haven't seen any hands go up, but let me offer you a chance to ask a question or two if you'd like. You can just, if you want to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and speak up. Anybody?
Hi there, it's Wendy.
Okay, hi.
Hi. I'm newish to this wonderful way of being, last kind of few years. So, and when I'm working with my clients, I don't talk about the three principles
Right,
too often per se. I
right.
work with them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I'm interested in. I like when you were talking about uh, when you talk to Sid and you say, "How do I talk about this?" Because that's something that I
Yeah,
think about. How do I talk about this, and how
yeah.
do I
Mhm.
uh, help
Other
people
people.
to see?
Yeah.
what I see.
Yeah.
So any little ideas that you have for me to maybe inspire me
Yeah.
to think about how I can talk about this. I don't think I've ever been uh, perfect at um, telling stories or knowing all the metaphors or being super witty. Um, I've always luckily, or call it what you want, been fairly optimistic and happy. And so when I came on to this, I realized, oh, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Um, so so yeah, anything that you have for me would be super. I've enjoyed your other webinars, and nice to meet you. Thanks
Nice
for
to meet
today.
you too. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say is that um, I love your outlook, that you have humility in terms of what remains to be seen and what more there is to learn, and yet you're grateful for what you know so far. And that's just to trust that. Don't even think about it. When you're with somebody, I always think, everybody's got a story to tell. And if I really listen to my clients and I don't think too far ahead of them, like I won't, if somebody says something to me and I think, oh yeah, now that would be perfect. It's hard telling about thought, but then I missed what they said while I was having that thought. And
Yep.
I'm kind of like tuning in and out. I wait until there's a silence and then I'm inspired and then I say what occurs to me.
Hmm.
And I think that trusting that that's going to happen, even if you have to listen for a while, um, that it will happen, that at some point, there'll be a quiet moment and all of a sudden you'll see your wisdom will pop up and go, try talking about this. And there's no one way, there's no, and I don't talk about
Hmm.
I'm talking about the principles here because that's what we're doing. But with clients, I don't usually bring up as such principles. I mean, I'm not teaching them theory of psychology. I'm
Yeah.
helping them live a better life. I'm pointing them to what the resources that they have to. And so the other thing is I try to remember that my job is not to impress them, but to serve them.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
uh, so I don't stop and ask myself, if I say this, are they going to think I'm stupid? Or, if it occurs to me and I feel right about it, I'll say it. Um, even if
Yep.
maybe they might laugh or maybe they might not or whatever, but I just trust that. I trust it. So that's to me, if I were giving advice, generally speaking, for anybody at any stage of the practice, is always listen to the client and, from love, from the innocence of them doing the best they can, no matter what terrible thing they're sharing with you. And then don't talk until you feel inspired. I mean, you can
Mm.
ask a question or you might, ask them if they'd like. I often would say, would you like me to get you a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or
Yeah.
something to drink? But if they need to take a break for themselves, sometimes people get going and you think, oh, I just can't listen to this whole long involved thing. But I don't know what I'm going to say till it occurs to me. And I've learned to trust that. At first, it was very difficult for me to trust
Hmm.
that because I was an over preparer, habitual over
Yeah.
preparer. And so, but I don't prepare now. I just trust. And I have to, catch myself if I get distracted, but that's it. And my job is to stay present and really care very much about the fact that this person I'm looking at may be struggling right now, but they have the same health that I do.
Yep.
And I know that if I can connect to that health and I can talk to them health to health, it's a partnership of health. And Mark Howard, who's uh, a great counselor and a great mentor, Mark Howard used to say, he used to call this work a partnership of health. And that's
Hmm.
really what it is. It's your health reaching out a hand to their health and saying, here, hold my hand. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, don't worry about it at all. You sound like you're doing great. Yeah.
I have one more
Okay.
little thought
Sure.
question. So when it comes to presentation,
Hmm.
and and I do present,
Yeah.
myself and my service and who I am to groups of people. As a matter of fact, I have one coming up in a week. So
Uh-huh.
this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I typically am an over preparer.
Yeah.
And I have found myself, because I'm over prepared, and this is really interesting. Uh, I get stuck,
Yeah.
and it is very interesting. So
Yeah.
I think I'm going to give it a go this next week and not prepare,
Yeah.
and yeah, and go in from a more in a more heart-centered approach, and more of a person to all of you people, and
Yeah.
I'll try it totally different. Yeah. So okay,
I
thanks.
wouldn't be afraid to do that. And I will tell you that preparation can be a like a noose,
Yep.
because if you're prepared and then somebody raises a point or something happens that takes the whole thing in a different direction and you haven't prepared for it, you're lost. Because you think, oh, I wasn't supposed to do it
Absolutely.
now. I was going to do this and I can't do that now. If you're not prepared, you are prepared because you're in the moment and you're going to respond from the moment, from whatever thought occurs to you when you keep calm in the moment. So
Hmm.
you got to trust wisdom better more than your preparation. Because wisdom is your preparation for life. That's, just look at it that way. It's not just your talk, it's life itself.
Yeah.
It's going to keep you.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you. I wish you the very best, Wendy.
Thank you.
Becky, I see your hand up. Yeah, you got to unmute yourself though. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I've just got a couple of quick questions. I just wanted to say that I love listening to your podcast
Thank
with you,
you.
and it's really, really good. I actually started from the beginning, and I'm just working my way through.
Oh my gosh. Thank you
Because
so much.
sometimes you don't always hear, because
Yeah.
when you go back and listen, you don't always, some things I've never heard first time round. So,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to ask, um, why? I think I'm maybe not seeing. I'm maybe not seeing it, but I have this story, um, that I'm a single mom on my own, and
Uh-huh.
I have this constant story that it's hard to be on my own, bringing
Hmm.
up my two boys.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just a story that just doesn't ever seem to. I don't feel like I can drop it because there's so much evidence to say that it's hard. I mean, as
Yeah.
an example today, I picked my sons up from a little football camp. We're on holiday, Easter holiday here. I picked them up from a football camp. They were in the car 2 minutes and they were arguing and
Yeah.
fighting and hitting each other.
Yeah.
And my mind automatically went, told you it's hard.
Yeah.
um, I told you it's hard. They're bringing up these boys on your own, and you're doing it all yourself, and then it's just
Yeah.
a constant reel of,
Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
seems
That,
to be
that
so
can
hard
take
to
you on
drop
a
it.
long trip through your thinking and what you've read and what other people have said. But
Yeah,
the question I would ask is, would I give these boys away?
well,
Do I love them?
yeah,
And are little boys mischievous and loud and
yes,
is there any mother of little boys that isn't having a similar experience? I mean, you kind of
yeah,
have to realize you're part of the human race and you're having a very human experience, which many women have. And and the real the real stuff that's hard is when they're little and they don't, they're harder to control, but you don't have the same ability to reason with them. But um, what you do when your mind goes there is that it makes it harder. It's like when I was trying to teach my daughter, living in Florida at the time, everybody had pools, and you have to, if you let your daughters or sons play at anyone else's house, you got to assume they're going to go in a pool at some point. And if they can't swim, unless somebody's watching, and you can't promise that, you could lose your child. So everybody teaches their children to swim when they're toddlers. And you can't explain it. You just have to teach them. And I remember thinking, I was trying to show her, like move your arms and this kind of thing. And I thought, no, wait. Like if she fell in the water, she would be frightened and she could drown because she swallowed a lot of water or breathed in a lot of water, but she's not going to drown if she just floats, because people float. So she has to not be afraid. That's all I have to teach her. It just dawned on me, like I don't have to teach her how to swim. I have to teach her to just let herself relax in the water and float and do what her body automatically will do to keep her afloat. And that was a whole new insight to me at the time. And so I took her out of the little class that she was in because it was rowdy and the kids weren't paying that much attention, and the teacher had trouble getting them all to do the same thing, and they were all too little. And so I just took her to my neighbor's pool, and I asked, is it okay if I bring my daughter over here when nobody's using the pool and help her to learn to swim? And she said, oh, fine, sure, use pool anytime. Took her to my neighbor's pool, and I walked down the steps into the water, and she was sitting in her little stroller with her straps on, so she wasn't going to be able to move. She was watching me, and I walked into the water, and I just fell backwards, and I floated around. And she starts going, Mama, Mama, and I'm going, hi, hi. And I'm laughing, and so then I said, okay. I took her with me into the pool. And, I did the same thing, and I put my hand gently under her back. So, just so she wouldn't, start fighting it. And she's floating. And I take my hand away, and she's still floating. And she starts giggling, and she loves it. And I mean, she's too little for the logic to say, okay, this is what you should do if you fall in the water. But I knew that if she wasn't afraid of falling in the water, that's what she would do, because it's the natural thing people do. Now, it worked out, and she actually became a triathlete later in life, and swimming was her best part of the event. She always made up time in the swimming part, and she used to swim the Chesapeake Bay race, which to me is something I would never dream of doing. But I remember thinking, now all the other mothers were freaking out because it was so hard to teach a 2-year-old to swim. And they would say, if your child can't swim, you shouldn't live in Florida. And I had the insight. She already knows how to swim. She just doesn't know it. She has to experience knowing how to swim. Well, every woman in the world is born in the idea that they're going to at some point have children. A lot of people don't, or choose not to later on. But when little girls are little, they always imagine themselves, they play house, they play mommy, and they expect they're going to have children. And it's kind of like, to raise a child, you got to think like a child. To not get all freaked out and everything, is you got to be willing to take some licks, put up with some noise, get noisy with them, not be afraid to join in the fun, and not feel like they've got to be perfect at every moment. Your job is to love them and raise them into happiness. And so many times I think it's very difficult. People think it's very difficult to drop that thinking, because it's so reinforced by magazines and parenting classes and other parents, and you got to make up your own rules.
Yeah.
But what I found is, every time I looked at my child and I would think, this is too hard, I don't know what to do, I'm completely lost here, I'm a businesswoman, I never expected to have to deal with toddlerhood. But I loved her. I mean, I still do. I mean, she's old now as a middle-aged woman, but she's got her own children. But I just remember thinking, no, you don't have to think like a mother. You have to play with life. just play the game of life, be where they are. And when things are, when they're not doing what you wish they would do, and when you're finding you're tired and you want to rest and you can't, um, you challenge yourself to say, okay, is there something I can do that would, quiet them down? Is there something that I could put on television, or some movie I could put on, or some game I could start with them that would get them quieter? And if there isn't, you got to be honest and just say, look, I'm going to have to power through this right now because I'm a single mom and that's the way life is, but I can rest later. I mean, we make a lot of sacrifices when we're taking care of our families. But I don't know very many. That's really very uncommon that I have met such people, but they're usually quite distressed about other things. But nobody would ever say, well, can you just take these kids away? I don't want to see them again. So you got to remember that you love them and you're tired. And you love them and you're a little pissed off right now. You love them and they make you angry. You love them. But the truth is, first of all, you love them. And you want to go back to that feeling of love every time you start getting frustrated, is to go back to start with, but I love them. And from a loving stance, what's the best I can do? Because they love you too.
Yeah.
Doesn't always look that way, but it's true.
Yeah. I suppose what I'm hearing is that I just need to be a bit more present
Well, or you just need to
in that
realize
moment.
when you have those thoughts, they're just passing thoughts. They're just negative thoughts that all mothers have when they're tired and it's been a tough day.
Yeah.
And they're you don't have to take them seriously. You just know that I don't need to spend a lot of time with these thoughts because they're not helping me at all.
Yeah.
And you're the
And
thing.
maybe stop comparing myself to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pointless too.
Trying to get it all right and
You
try and
got
be
it.
a single woman, do it all.
Yeah, everybody's family they invent their own way of being with their family. And I always try to discourage people, except the ones that are written from the standpoint of the principals, to not read parenting books because they're full of rules and things, and as though every family would be the same way if they just follow the same rules. And that's just not true, because kids are unique little beings. And you gotta, you're their mother, you're the closest to them of anybody else in their life except each other. And you got to trust your wisdom. You got to trust that nobody can tell you do this with your kids and it'll work out great. You got to take care of yourself the best you can. And know that when you get caught up in negative thinking, you don't dwell on it and don't take it to heart. Just think, okay, it's what I do when I'm tired. I get these thoughts. It's a good sign that I probably need to come up with an activity that they can do for a while I take a deep breath.
Yeah.
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 And I'm
Absolutely.
sure that, the day will come when you'll look back and you'll go, oh, they were so adorable.
Yeah, one day it'll be too quiet round here.
Exactly.
And I'll be wishing that they were walking through my front door and
Right.
fighting and arguing.
That's right. Yeah, and everybody realizes that, but by the time you realize it, they're off, so.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, one more, Susan. And
I wish I had known this. I don't know how old your children are, Becky, but I wish I had known this when my kids were still young. They're all old now. 20 is too late for them. No, they're okay. But a big insight that I had around family was like, because this is 100% all the time the principals are working.
right.
And so it doesn't matter outside of me. I think I could intellectually, but I really saw it at one point was really anybody, even my partner who I still live with.
Yeah.
And one day he was doing a thing that he always does, and I saw that it was really all me, my own thinking. Like I really believed that he had to change.
Yeah, right.
But that wasn't okay. And
good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like since then I've really I see like, oh, that's just what he does in a low state of mind. And And then I had all this thinking, and the truth is, if I was in a low state of mind, that's when that thinking would come up.
Right.
And when I first started learning the principles, I would have a few times where he would be doing his thing, low state of mind, and I wasn't in a low state of mind, and I thought it was cute.
Right.
So now I've come to see, like, it's more his behavior, how I'm reacting to anybody else's behavior is more an indicator of me than them.
It's a clue
I
about
mean,
the
it's
state of
so-
mind you're in. And what's funny is that what you said about, you know, when I'm in a good state of mind, it's cute, because that's the same way it is with kids. You know, the stuff that just drives you nuts when you're exhausted and you can't handle any more noise and stuff is not cute. But if they're racing around the house, you know, playing airplane or something, and you're not tired and you don't, you know, they're not messing anything up because you're going to clean later, you know, it is cute. So that's kind of our clue that it is us, not them, because they don't change that much. They just keep playing. So that's a great insight to know that whatever we see in the people around us, the people that are part of our lives that annoys us, is not them trying to annoy us or them doing something that's annoying. It's us being annoyed because we are in a state of mind that everything is annoying.
Yeah, it's like they're a gauge for my state of mind. Like,
Right.
That's
Exactly.
just information now.
Exactly.
But Sydney Banks, I forget which one it is, but he talks about one of the videos with Sydney.
Yeah.
He's saying, like, you have to take care of you. You have nothing to give. Like, if I open my wallet,
Yeah.
and I have nothing to give. So that really hit me, that just take care of yourself first. I'm also a teacher with kindergartners. So
yeah.
So if you're in a low state of mind, you have nothing to give. So you really have to take care of you first.
That's right.
Do damage control, get yourself into a better state, and then proceed.
And realize that if you just can't do any better, you have to say, Mommy's in a bad mood right now. Don't talk to me. But they won't. You know, my experience with my daughter was that if I told her I was in a bad mood and it wasn't a good time to ask for anything, she knew it wasn't a good time to ask for anything. You know, I said, you know, just wait and I'll talk to you later. And, you know, it's fine.
Yeah, everybody needs a time out every now and then.
Everybody needs time out. That's right. Oh, that's great. That's a lovely insight. So can I take one more question, or do we have to quit, Stephanie? I'm not sure how close we are in our.
We can finish with one more question. We've gone over the time, but I think that's okay.
Dennis.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. I'm just curious if you could say something about I've lost my dad last year, and also my partner this year. She left, and I have to move from a house. So there's been a tremendous amount of grief, sadness, really, really deep things. And I've known about the principles for a year, but it's like there's a struggle sometimes. Something that is, it's just thoughts, or I don't say that, but it's not.
I know it sounds dismissive when you realize how powerful the thoughts are at creating a real experience. Yeah. It sounds like if somebody says, oh, it's just your thinking, it'll pass, you can't hear it as anything but dismissive in that state of mind, even if you're saying it to yourself. So, you know, part of, Dennis, I'm very sorry because you've had a big sort of like a waterfall of negative things happen all at once, but what we go through in life is always something that we learn from as we go, and we learn more about ourselves as we deal with it. And what I'm hearing in some of what you're saying is that, gee, you know, I started to get involved in the principles and I'm fairly new, but I was thinking that I wouldn't experience this much pain and grief. But, you know, the principles explain it. It doesn't prevent it. But what it does, and what I mean by that is when you've lost somebody that's very dear to you, when you've suffered a loss, a personal loss in your business or your home or whatever, it is normal and natural that you're going to be sad. And you're going to respond to that in the natural way. When you first think about it, it's very hard to think about it. And over the course of time, it gets, gets a little, you get some distance and some vision that puts it in perspective in life, and everybody heals at their own pace. What the principles offer you is the hope that the process is a process of you just allowing the thinking to pass through you, experiencing it out, and not being afraid that now your life is ruined. You're just going through a life experience that everybody goes through at some point, and most people don't have to go through a whole bunch of them at one time, but you do. But you don't, you can't expect that knowing that it's your thinking is going to make it any less painful when you think it. All it does is it lets you know that because you are the thinker, and right now you really have to, it's too fresh and too new and too big a part of your life to put it out of your mind. You can't do that right now. But that that your mind is a creative, an engine of creativity, so to speak, and that more thoughts will come to you. And if your goal is to take care of yourself and rest and allow thoughts to come and go, allow them to be not, experience them out, but don't dwell on them. Don't get frightened by them. Don't be reacting. Just when certain thoughts come to mind, just okay, that's the thoughts that are coming to mind right now. I'm just going to let them pass through. And you'll be surprised as time goes by, you get perspective, and you realize that what most people experience is that they get more and more understanding of the context of what's happened to them in their life, so that as they think about it over time, the thoughts are more helpful than hurtful. And at some point, you can look back and see what you've learned from the experience, what it meant to you at the time, and how to take that experience and help it to help you avoid difficult situations in life going forward. But right now, it's too new. And you don't want to put pressure on yourself to feel some way you just can't feel right now. But you also don't want to let yourself think that this is it, I'm going to be miserable like this now forever, because you're not. If that makes sense.
It really does make a lot of sense.
So what you're learning to understand how powerful our thinking is, really. And when we have terrible things that happen in our life, that's when we really see that every time we think of them, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You've all had those experiences, but you also realize that when you're not thinking those thoughts, when you look back on it, when they're less frequent and less dominant in your thinking, you go on with the present moment in your daily life, and you're able to function. And then pretty soon your memories take a place in the tapestry of your life, then you can look at them without pain. You'll be able to look back and you can remember the things you really want to think about, that you want to be sure you remember, but you don't have to. The pain is past.
Yeah.
Yeah. But don't be beating yourself up because you're experiencing it now, because it's too soon. It's hard when it's all fresh, and that's very much what's on your mind.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we get frightened by our own thinking, and then we think more about it, trying to fight it off. That doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I wish you the very best, Dennis.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you, Stephanie, for managing this, sort of trying to manage us.
It is my
Anyway.
great pleasure. And thank you, Judy. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Pleasure. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, Stephanie can pass emails or anything on. So thank you all.
Thank you, Judy.
Welcome. Take care.
You too.
Thanks,
Bye.
Judy. Thanks, Stephanie.
Judy.
Bye.